I won't leave you. Those words echoed in James's mind as he stumbled through the cold, wrecked battlefield. The air was thick with smoke, and the scent of burnt metal hung heavy in the atmosphere. His combat suit was malfunctioning, the systems sputtering as the mission had gone horribly wrong. He had lost his team, his brothers in arms, out here, and now he was alone. The desert sun beat down, oppressive and unforgiving. His helmet's visor cracked, making it impossible to see clearly. He checked his rifle, empty. His only hope was to find shelter, to survive this hostile terrain. But then, a shadow shifted in the distance. Was it a mirage? No. As he pushed through the dust, he saw her, an alien warrior, a towering figure with greenish skin and golden eyes, her body broken, her legs missing, left to die on this desolate world. She was barely conscious, her chest rising and falling with ragged breaths, her eyes locked onto him with a fiery intensity. A warrior, even in the face of death. He froze, his heart pounding. She looked at him, not with fear, but with defiance. His instincts screamed at him to move, to leave her. She was an alien. She was the enemy. But something inside him shifted. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, the way her eyes seemed to call for help despite her pride. Maybe it was the unspoken understanding of their shared fate, survival. He dropped to his knees beside her, not caring that his armor was scraping against the rough, burning sand. He scanned her injuries, the raw wounds from the explosion that had taken her legs. His mind raced, and he hesitated. Could he really help her? Could he trust her, or would this be a trick, a trap? Her breathing quickened, and her eyes narrowed in pain. Human, she whispered, her voice rough. Leave me. I am nothing now. James felt a pang of guilt deep in his chest. No, he couldn't just walk away. His training, his humanity, told him to help. I won't leave you, he said, his voice firm, despite the doubt that crept up in his mind. He adjusted her weight, lifting her as gently as possible, ignoring the thumping in his chest. She was heavier than he expected, but he didn't care. She was alive, and that was all that mattered. He moved through the wreckage, carrying her toward the remnants of a broken building that might offer shelter from the storm approaching. With each step, the world around him seemed to grow darker. The storm was closing in. But as they reached the ruins, something strange happened. She shifted in his arms, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again. You are not like others, she whispered. You're different. The word struck him. What did she mean? As the storm hit, darkness enveloped them both. But in the heart of the chaos, something was changing. James was no longer just a soldier. He was a protector. He was her only hope. And together, they would face whatever came next. James moved cautiously through the ruins, his muscles aching with every step. The storm outside howled with a deafening fury, but within the crumbling walls, there was a brief moment of peace. He lowered Zara onto the ground, her weight resting against a broken pillar. The alien warrior's body was still, save for the rise and fall of her chest. Her golden eyes were shut, but James could feel her presence, her strength, even in this vulnerable state. He was no doctor, but he knew enough to stabilize her wounds. His hands shook slightly as he unsealed his medkit, pulling out the basic supplies he'd been given. He didn't know how much time he had. He didn't know how long it would take for her to recover, but there was one thing he did know. He couldn't leave her. As he worked to clean her injuries, she stirred, her voice barely a whisper. You're wasting your time, she said, her tone tired but filled with determination. You're just a human. I'm beyond saving. James paused for a moment, looking down at her. Her words were filled with sorrow, but also with pride. She was a warrior, and admitting vulnerability was the last thing she wanted. You're wrong, James replied, his voice steady. I didn't carry you all this way just to give up on you. He continued his work, applying pressure to the bandages, and securing her leg stumps to minimize the bleeding. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable. There was a connection in their shared experience, both of them broken, both of them alone, but neither willing to give up. As he finished, he sat back, wiping the sweat from his brow. His body screamed for rest, but he didn't dare close his eyes. Not yet. Zara's eyes opened slowly, meeting his. There was a flicker of something in them, an emotion he couldn't quite place. Why? She asked, her voice hoarse. Why would you help me? I'm your enemy. I should be left to die here. James looked at her, his expression hardening. Because every life matters. Even yours. She said nothing for a long moment, her eyes narrowing in thought. Then, to his surprise, she gave a weak smile. You're strange, human. He chuckled softly, the tension between them easing just a little. I've been told that before. He paused, glancing at the storm outside. But we're both still here, and we're going to get through this. Zara didn't reply, but she seemed to relax, the rigid tension in her posture slowly fading. As the hours passed, they sat in silence, only the sound of the storm to fill the air. James couldn't help but wonder what had brought them both to this point. This unlikely alliance, this strange bond. But as the night wore on, one thing became clear. Their survival didn't depend on where they came from, or what they had been. It depended on what they chose to do now. And in that moment, James knew he would not leave her. Not now, not ever. James awoke to the quiet hum of the storm raging outside. The ruins were eerily silent now, the violent winds of the night having died down to a soft, steady howl. The dim light, filtering through cracks in the walls, illuminated the broken structure, casting long shadows on the ground. His muscles ached from exhaustion, but he didn't dare close his eyes again. He glanced at Zara, still lying motionless where he had left her. Her breathing was steady now, a sign of progress. She had fallen asleep hours ago, her body no longer trembling with the pain that had gripped her earlier. As he watched her, a strange sense of calm settled over him. He wasn't sure why he had made the decision to help her. After all, she was an alien, a warrior of a species that had fought against humans for years. But in her eyes, he had seen something he couldn't ignore, something human. And now, he was here, beside her in this ruined world, waiting for whatever came next. The silence was broken by a soft groan from Zara. Her eyes fluttered open, the golden glow still present, though dimmer now. You're still here, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. James gave a small nod. I told you, I'm not leaving. She looked at him for a moment, a faint glimmer of something like gratitude in her eyes. You should, she muttered. You don't have to waste your time on me. James shook his head, his face hardening. No, we're in this together now. He reached for his water canteen, offering it to her. She hesitated for a moment, then took a small sip. The liquid was cold, but it seemed to give her some strength. You're strange, human, she said again. But this time there was less bitterness in her tone. Most would have left me to die. James sat back against the broken wall, his eyes scanning the ruins for any signs of movement. Not all humans are the same. There was a long pause before Zara spoke again, her voice thoughtful. What do you want from me, human? Why did you help me? James didn't answer right away. He wasn't sure how to explain it, or if he could. He wasn't looking for anything from her. He just knew that in this moment, there was no room for selfishness. I don't want anything, he finally said, his voice steady. I just want to make sure we both make it out of here. Zara seemed to consider his words for a long while. Finally, she gave a small nod, as if coming to some sort of understanding. You're a warrior, just like me, she said. But you fight with something else, something I didn't think humans had. What's that? James asked, a hint of curiosity in his voice. Hope, Zara said simply. The word lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. Hope. In a world filled with violence and destruction, hope was something precious. And it was something that had been all but lost in the chaos of the war. But James had it, and now, it seemed that Zara did too. They weren't enemies anymore. Not in this moment. They were survivors. And together, they would face whatever came next. The morning light filtered through the cracks in the ruined walls, casting long shadows across the broken structure. James sat with his back against the cold stone, his eyes scanning the horizon. The storm had passed, but the air was thick with dust, and the world outside felt eerily still. He could hear Zara stirring beside him, her soft groans telling him she was waking up. Slowly, her golden eyes opened, meeting his with an intensity that still took him by surprise. She had come a long way since the night before. Her body was still broken, but there was a spark in her gaze that wasn't there earlier. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was starting to heal. James offered her a small smile, though he could see the weight of exhaustion in his own eyes. How do you feel? He asked, his voice low. Zara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she shifted slightly, her body stiff, as if testing the limits of her injuries. She winced, but didn't complain. Better, she said finally, her voice hoarse but steady. I haven't felt this way in a long time. James nodded, feeling a small sense of relief. He had been afraid that her injuries would be more severe than he could handle, but she had proven herself to be stronger than he had expected. He wasn't sure what kept her going. Was it pride, or was it something else? Something deeper? She turned her head toward him, her eyes searching his face for something. Why did you do it? She asked, her voice quiet but insistent. Why help me? James hesitated, his mind racing for an answer. The truth was simple, but it was hard to put into words. Because I couldn't leave you. It's that simple, he said. Zara studied him for a moment, as though weighing his words. You didn't have to, she replied, her tone softer now. I'm not your responsibility. James smiled again, though this time it was more genuine. Maybe not, he said, but I'm not leaving anyone behind. Not while I still have a choice. Zara didn't say anything more, but she gave him a small nod of understanding. For a long while, they sat in silence, the only sounds coming from the wind outside and the occasional creak of the building as it settled. The world felt strangely peaceful in this moment, as if time had slowed down, and they were the only two beings left in it. After a while, James stood up, feeling the stiffness in his own muscles. He stretched, trying to work out the kinks from the long night. Zara watched him carefully, her gaze following every movement. We need to get moving, he said, looking down at her. The longer we stay here, the more danger we're in. Zara didn't argue. She nodded, her expression serious now. I know, she said. She struggled to sit up, her body still trembling slightly with the effort, but she did it. James moved quickly to her side, offering his arm to help steady her. She took it gratefully, though she didn't lean on him too much. They were both survivors, and neither of them had the luxury of weakness. Together, they began to make their way out of the ruins, each step heavy with the weight of what had happened and what was yet to come. But for the first time since the crash, James felt like they had a chance. They weren't just two soldiers fighting for survival anymore. They were a team. The sun was high now, the desert stretching endlessly before them, a sea of dust and ruin. James adjusted his pack, feeling the weight of their situation pressing on him. The quiet between him and Zara felt different today. There was a new sense of purpose between them. She was moving more confidently now, her steps still slow but determined. They were heading towards the mountains in the distance, a place James hoped would offer shelter and perhaps a way out of this mess. Every step forward felt like a victory, but the fear of being caught, of not making it out, loomed over them. The silence was only broken by the soft crunch of their footsteps on the dry earth. Zara walked beside him, her golden eyes scanning the horizon, always alert, always watching. He knew she was used to war, used to survival, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was a person, someone who had been given a second chance, and James was determined not to let that go to waste. He glanced at her, noticing the way she moved, her posture straighter, more assured. You're doing better, he said, trying to break the silence. Zara didn't look at him, but she nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. I'll live, she replied. James smiled slightly. That's the plan. They walked for hours, the sun beating down on them relentlessly. By the time they reached the base of the mountains, both of them were exhausted, but the sight of the rocky outcrop ahead filled them with a renewed sense of hope. They were close. As they started climbing, James felt a surge of energy. If they could just make it to higher ground, they would be safe. He helped Zara up the steep slopes, offering her support as she carefully tested her legs with each movement. It wasn't easy for her. Her legs, though healing, were still weak, and every step took effort. But she didn't complain. She kept pushing forward, determined to make it to the top. When they finally reached a ledge that overlooked the valley below, James stopped and set down his pack. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked out across the landscape. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the desert. They had made it. Zara sat down beside him, her breathing heavy but steady. For a moment, they both just looked out at the vast emptiness before them. We're not safe yet, James said quietly. But we've made it this far. We'll keep going. Zara looked at him then, her golden eyes searching his face. Why? She asked softly. Why do you keep helping me? James paused, taking a deep breath. He hadn't really thought about it until now. Maybe it was because they were both trapped in this strange, hostile world, Or maybe it was just because he couldn't stand the thought of leaving someone to die. He didn't know. Because we're not so different, you and I, he said after a moment. We're both just trying to survive. And I don't leave anyone behind. Zara didn't speak for a while. She simply nodded, and James could feel the weight of her understanding. It was unspoken, but it was there. They were in this together. And together, they would face whatever came next. The night settled over the mountains, the cold air biting at their skin as the stars blinked down from the black sky. James and Zara sat on the rocky ledge, the exhaustion from the day's journey hanging over them. The silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. It had become a companion in itself. The wind howled in the distance, but for the moment, they were safe. The world below seemed so far away now, as if they had stepped out of time itself. Zara shifted beside him, her golden eyes reflecting the starlight. "You think we'll make it out of here alive?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. James looked out over the valley below them, his thoughts racing. He had been asking himself that very question for hours, ever since they had made it to the top of the mountain. The storm had passed, but the danger was far from over. They were still in enemy territory, and their resources were running low. But despite everything, James felt something stir inside him. A quiet, stubborn hope. "I think we will," he said, his voice steady. Zara didn't respond right away. Instead, she turned her gaze to the horizon, her face unreadable. James couldn't tell what she was thinking, but he could see the tension in her posture. The weight of her past, of everything she had fought for and lost, was still there. But now, she was here, with him, and they were facing this together. "Why do you keep helping me?" Zara asked again, her voice soft but insistent. James turned to her, meeting her gaze. Her eyes were filled with something that almost looked like fear, but not quite. "Because I know what it's like to be alone," James said, his voice low. "I've lost people too." Zara didn't look away. "And yet you still trust me. After everything." James exhaled slowly, glancing down at his hands. His thoughts drifted back to the crash, to the days of isolation before he had found Zara. There had been moments when he had wondered if he would ever make it out of this nightmare. But in the face of everything, of the war, the destruction, the uncertainty, he had made a choice. And that choice was to keep moving forward, no matter what. "I trust you because you're still here," he said. "You're still fighting. And that's all that matters." Zara's eyes softened slightly, though the hard edge to her expression remained. For a long while, they just sat there, side by side, taking in the silence. It was strange, this quiet. After all the chaos, all the fighting, the endless battles, this stillness felt like a gift. It felt like a moment of peace in a world that was anything but peaceful. But James knew it wouldn't last. They had to keep moving. They had to find a way out. The question was, where would they go from here? He turned to Zara, who had been lost in thought, and met her gaze once more. "We need to keep moving," he said. "Tomorrow, we head further into the mountains. There's a settlement not far from here, and I think it's our best chance." Zara nodded, her expression unreadable. "Lead the way, human," she said quietly, the weight of her words hanging in the air. And with that, they stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since the crash, James felt a spark of something stronger than fear. It was hope, and it was something he wasn't going to let go of. The first light of dawn broke through the clouds as James and Zara made their way deeper into the mountain range. The air was crisp, cool against their skin, but the stillness of the morning was deceptive. Every step felt heavier now, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on them. The climb had been arduous, the rocky terrain unforgiving. Zara's movements were slower than before, her legs still not fully healed, but her determination never wavered. She refused to show weakness, and James admired her for it. They moved in silence, the only sounds their footsteps on the gravel and the distant wind whispering through the trees. After hours of walking, they reached a small plateau. James set his pack down, wiping the sweat from his brow as he looked around. The view was breathtaking, but the sense of peace was short-lived. "We're close," he said, glancing back at Zara. She didn't respond immediately, her gaze fixed on the horizon, but he could see the exhaustion in her eyes. "Do you think they're still out there?" she asked quietly. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much, someone who had been on the run for far too long. James understood. The war, the destruction, It followed them everywhere. But he wasn't ready to face that fear. Not yet. We'll keep moving forward, he said, his voice firm. We'll make it. Zara gave him a sharp look, as if considering his words carefully. There was a long pause before she spoke again, her tone softer this time. Why do you still believe in this, human? After everything we've been through, why keep going? James hesitated, searching for the right words. He had asked himself that question 1,000 times, but each time, the answer was the same. Because if we don't keep moving forward, then we've already lost, he said finally. Zara's gaze softened for a moment, as though she was seeing him in a new light. You're different, she said, almost to herself. You're not like the others. James didn't answer. Instead, he turned and looked out over the vast expanse before them. The road ahead was still unclear, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. They weren't just two survivors anymore. They were a team, bound together by something stronger than just the will to survive. They were fighting for a future, for hope. And that made all the difference. The wind began to pick up again, the chill of the morning creeping into their bones. James stood, stretching his stiff muscles. We should keep going, he said. It's still a long way to the settlement. Zara nodded, though there was a hesitation in her step now. She was stronger than she had been, but the weight of their journey was starting to take its toll. Together, they began their descent down the mountain, moving slowly, carefully, but resolutely. As they walked, James couldn't help but glance over at Zara every now and then. Her resilience, her unwillingness to give up, was something he had come to admire. They didn't need to speak to understand each other anymore. They were in this together, and whatever came next, they would face it as a team. The journey had been long, and the weight of their shared struggle had begun to take its toll. The sun had set behind the mountains, leaving the world in a soft twilight that felt like it could go on forever. James and Zara sat together at the edge of a small clearing, the remnants of a campfire flickering between them. The fire was small, just enough to provide warmth and light, but in the stillness of the night, it felt like the only thing holding them together. Zara's breathing had steadied, but her eyes, always sharp, were clouded with something James couldn't quite read. The silence between them stretched, comfortable yet heavy, like the calm before a storm. James had been wondering for hours if they were close enough to the settlement to rest, but he didn't ask. Instead, he focused on the crackling fire, lost in his thoughts. Do you ever think about what comes after? Zara's voice cut through the silence, soft and almost uncertain. James glanced at her, surprised by the question. What do you mean? He asked. She looked down at her hands, her fingers brushing over the dirt as if she were gathering her thoughts. After all of this, after the war, after the fighting, what happens when we reach the end? James paused, his mind racing. He had never allowed himself to think that far ahead. Survival had been the only thing on his mind, but now, with Zara asking, the question seemed unavoidable. I don't know, he said honestly. I guess we'll find out when we get there. Zara nodded slowly, her eyes distant. I don't know what I'm supposed to be after all of this is over, she murmured, almost to herself. I was born to fight. It's all I've ever known. James shifted, his eyes locking with hers. And you're more than that, he said firmly. You're not just a soldier. You're someone who's survived. Someone who's capable of something more. Zara didn't respond right away. She seemed to consider his words, and for the first time since they had met, James saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. She wasn't the warrior she had once been. She was someone new, someone he was starting to understand. And you? She asked after a moment, her voice quieter now. What about you? What do you want when this is all over? James took a deep breath, his eyes on the fire as the flames danced and flickered. I don't know, he admitted. I've never really thought about it. I just wanted to make it out alive. But now, I don't know. I think I want something more than just surviving. They sat in silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. The fire was the only thing left between them, and in its light, James realized that something had changed. The bond between them had deepened, not just through shared struggle, but through the quiet understanding that they were more than just survivors. They were people, with hopes and fears, with something to fight for beyond just the next day. Zara shifted beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. Maybe we're not so different after all, she said. James looked at her, the truth of her words settling in his chest. Yeah, he replied quietly. Maybe we're not. The next morning, The sun rose in a blaze of color, painting the sky with streaks of pink and orange. The air was cooler now, the heat of the day not yet bearing down on them, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead still hung heavy in the air. James and Zara packed up their meager camp, the quiet between them no longer strained but comfortable, as if they had both come to terms with the strange partnership they had forged. The mountains loomed ahead, their peaks reaching toward the sky like silent sentinels. They had traveled far, but they still had a long way to go. Zara was moving better today, her steps more assured, though she still leaned on James for support now and then. James noticed that she was quieter than usual, her eyes distant as she scanned the landscape. He knew she was thinking about the same thing he was, the settlement they were heading toward. They had no guarantees it would be a safe haven, but it was their only hope. As they walked, the sound of their footsteps filled the silence, each step carrying them closer to the unknown. "Do you ever wonder what it'll be like when we get there?" James asked after a long pause. Zara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what to expect," she said, her voice distant. "I've seen too many places that promise safety, only to find out they were just as dangerous as the war zone we left behind." James nodded, understanding her hesitation. "I get it, but we've made it this far. We've survived." Zara's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You're right. We have. But it's different now. I'm not sure what I'm fighting for anymore. I've been so focused on survival, I forgot what it feels like to want something more." Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. James didn't know how to answer at first. The question of what they were fighting for had been nagging at him too, but he had never voiced it. They were both caught in a world of uncertainty, but the hope that had driven him forward was beginning to shift. "Maybe it's not about fighting for something anymore," he said slowly. "Maybe it's about finding something to live for. Something worth fighting for." Zara didn't respond immediately, but her expression softened. For the first time, she seemed to let her guard down just a little. "Maybe," she said quietly. They continued walking, the weight of their words settling in the space between them. The journey ahead was uncertain, but the path they were on felt clearer now. They weren't just surviving anymore, they were living. And in that moment, that was enough. The settlement they sought still felt like a distant dream, but for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. Together, they could make it. Together, they had a chance.